return of thrashers Transilience more than 30 years after their debut album. An album that raised some attention when it was released, but remained a cult work for some. A lot of time has passed since then, and although the band retains a disconcertingly progressive approach, thrash metal has long since left this port. The name of Voivod springs to mind a lot, and it's a comparison that makes sense, but Nervesaw ends up sounding too little to make up for the more than 30 years left behind. If you think of it as a new band that fuses prog, metal, and alternative, it might help the standards, but whatever the case, what remains is curiosity about their next work.
It doesn't even seem like 6 years since the one-man band Taake's last album. Maybe that's because of the splits that were released in 2020 and 2021. Just 4 songs in over 40 minutes gives you the idea that you're in for something more epic, even by the standards of previous albums. Which could mean that this is potentially a boring album. Which is not the case. The raw production and lack of bass may not help to enhance the power of the music, but the 4 epic hymns are very dynamic and hold the listener for the entire duration, making this an album that will grow on the listener, as long as there is an open mind.
The return of Knife, who after winning attention with their 2019 self-titled debut album on Dying Victims Productions, are now back with their second album on Napalm Death Records. In changing publishing houses, they haven't lost any attributes, on the contrary. The mixture of speed/thrash metal and punk/hardcore, especially in the choruses, is still very inspired, and Heaven into Dust maintains the love of the traditional, with a raw production and themes that evoke the truest spirit of metal, whether extreme or not. And it may seem a contradiction to say this, knowing the intrusion of punk elements. Here they are not intrusive and sound completely integrated. Everything flows naturally. Natural in a powerful way.
Although Perracide only has drummer Perra Carlson as a member, it can't be considered a one-man band as it has the help of many session musicians. Carlson's career is long and impressive, and here he decided to create an entity where he could give vent to his thrash metal roots, with black and death metal providing the defining color. The orientation and distinction between the two genres is also distributed according to the guest musicians. Although it could potentially be an album that sounds like a patchwork quilt, there is a general feeling of devotion to the most extreme thrash metal that ends up uniting all the underdog tracks and representing a cohesive release. Thrash Addiction.
The problem of receiving hundreds of promos a month means that not only is it impossible to get to them all, but when you do, you don't know how they got here. This is the case with Thai band M.E.L.T, who released their debut album last August, which surprised us very positively. With a modern slant that doesn't differ too much from what is currently being done, and which may make fans of more traditional sounds queasy, the band has the ability to make really catchy and interesting songs, even if they can't escape the déjà vu that we can feel. It's still a very interesting debut.
This is the second album by the Finns Goatburner, who bring us another dose of uncompromising death grind that is completely irresistible. Production is totally organic, favoring the lower frequencies, which gives it an old-school feel that sounds refreshing at this point. It sounds genuine and still has the destructive power that any death grind band should have. A return to the basics of the style, which still sounds like a step forward for the band's career.
This is the second album from Hertz Kankarok's project, which could be a real surprise for progressive metal lovers. Although the album's name and style could be considered a kind of experimental gothic metal, it's the progressive elements that make it so interesting. For those who think there are no surprises left in this genre, this could be the biggest curveball of recent years. Heavy, melodic, intense, and even uncomfortable, especially for those who have definite expectations of what to expect from something that suggests gothic metal. This is an album to check out and devour, and as you do so, be overwhelmed by it.
Allgema's debut album couldn't be better, with a number of outstanding achievements. It's an album that shows a band that is already mature and far from looking for a direction, but also with diverse possibilities at its disposal, which only makes the dynamics of its songs enormous. Alternative is an inevitable cliché that arises as a way of categorizing what the band does, as a result of the way in which the modern, full production compositions fit into a more modern, groovy strand, especially tracks like Octopus and Split Fire. However, contrary to what is more common in alternative, we have a traditional side, especially in the solos, which is absolutely refreshing. Also noteworthy is the beautiful power ballad Home, featuring Sandra Oliveira from Blame Zeus, which is one of the most memorable tracks on the album, alongside Bad Moon Rising. An impressive debut.
The Saw's debut album comes with a death metal enthusiasm as if it were 1991. And many times on Nothing But Darkness, it feels like we're decades behind. Especially when the lead guitar comes in, with that feeling that comes from outside the rest of the song, almost like it's floating in the middle of the rest. Despite this feeling that we're dealing with something dated, it's still a piece of work that we can't find anything wrong with. Except that it doesn't really excite us, given the competition for our attention these days. That really is a key point. A debut that makes us want to hear more in the future.
It's always good to see the world metal scene gaining a foothold in places where it's not so common. Proof of this is the second album from Armenia-based Eternally Scarred. The sound is actually quite traditional. It's more common to see bands from exotic locations embracing more modern trends than traditional ones, with tasteful, melodic death doom metal that manages to captivate us easily. To be totally correct, it's not retro, and it does contain some modern trends in the riffs, but in general, it draws from the school of the 90s, before we started confusing melodic death metal with metalcore. A good album and a band to get to know better